I remember the cold more than anything else. Not the kind of cold that nips at your nose when you step outside on a winter morning, the kind that makes you laugh and pull your scarf tighter before ducking back into a warm kitchen that smells of rice and doenjang jjigae. No, I remember the other kind. The kind that seeps into your bones slowly, quietly, the way grief does. The kind that finds you when you are small and has no business being that patient with something so fragile. I was 6 years old the first time my mother locked me outside. It had been snowing for 2 days straight. The kind of snow that muffles the world into silence, that turns the street lamps into pale, blurry halos, that makes the world look soft and forgiving even when it is not. I had knocked something over, a ceramic vase she kept on the kitchen shelf, a wedding gift she'd always said, though I never understood why she kept something from a marriage she seemed to despise so deeply. Shattered. I remember the sound, sharp and final, and then the silence that followed was somehow worse. Because in that silence, I knew what was coming. She didn't yell. My mother rarely yelled. She had a particular way of going very, very quiet when she was angry, like the pressure before a storm, and her eyes would narrow to something unrecognizable. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was always so much stronger than you'd expect from someone so small, and she walked me to the front door, opened it, and pushed me out. I was in my socks. I hadn't even finished dinner. "Stay there until you learn to be careful," she said. Then the door closed. I sat on the front step with snow falling around me and pressed my knees to my chest and tried very hard not to cry, because somewhere in the back of my 6-year-old mind I had already learned that crying didn't change anything. It didn't open doors. It didn't warm the air. It just made your face wet and cold at the same time, and then you felt even worse than before. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that my socks were soaked through. Long enough that my fingers had gone from hurting to numb. Long enough that a neighbor passing by on the street looked at me with an expression I only later learned to name, pity. That was my childhood. Not all of it, of course. There were ordinary days too, days when my mother moved through the apartment like a ghost, present but not quite real, days when she packed my lunch and braided my sister's hair and everything seemed almost normal. But the cold days, those are the ones that stayed with me. The ones that found permanent residence in the back of my chest, like a small ember that never quite went out and never quite caught flame. Just there. Warm in the wrong way. My parents divorced when I was 8. I know now, as an adult, that the marriage had been failing long before I was born, that my mother's insecurities had been slowly dismantling the foundation of what they'd built together the way termites work, quietly, invisibly, until one day everything caves in. She was jealous of his co-workers, of his time, of his laughter when it wasn't directed at her. She accused him of things he hadn't done. She turned her unhappiness outward with her hands and her silences and her locked doors. And my father, who was the gentlest man I have ever known, tried for years to hold it together until finally, mercifully, he stopped trying. The courts gave me to him. I don't know if my mother fought for me. I have never asked and I am not sure I want to know the answer. But I remember the day I moved into my father's apartment. It was a small place, 2 bedrooms on the 4th floor of a building in Mapogu, with a window that looked out over a little park where old men played baduk in the summer. He had bought me a new bedspread, pale blue with little white clouds on it, and he taped a drawing to my wall, something I'd made in school the previous year that he'd apparently kept, though I had forgotten it entirely. "This is your room now," he said, crouching down to my eye level the way he always did when he had something important to tell me. "You can do whatever you want with it. Paint it a different color if you like. Hang things on the wall. Leave your socks on the floor." I blinked at him. "You can leave your socks on the floor?" I repeated, because that had never been permitted before. He smiled, that slow, warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Within reason," he said. "Let's say no more than 3 pairs at a time." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in what felt like a very long time, and the sound surprised me like hearing music come from a room you thought was empty. That was my father. Kim Jae-won. The most quietly extraordinary person I have ever had the privilege of loving. Growing up with my father was not without its difficulties. We were not rich. There were months when he worked double shifts at the printing company where he was employed and came home with his back aching and his eyes red, and I would make him instant noodles because it was the only thing I knew how to cook, and he would eat every single bite and tell me it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. "Appa, it's instant noodles. From a packet. And the chef matters, not the ingredients." He was like that. Relentlessly, almost stubbornly optimistic. Not in a performative way, not in the way of someone who is pretending the hard things aren't hard. He never pretended. When I came home from school with bruises from older boys who had decided that being an Omega was something to be punished for, he held ice to my face and said, "They are afraid of what they don't understand. That is their limitation, not yours." When I failed my university entrance exams the first time, He sat with me at the kitchen table and said, "Then we try again. That's all. We try again." He never made me feel like a burden. In all the years I lived with him, through all the ordinary disasters and small victories of growing up, he never once made me feel like a burden. I want you to understand how significant that is. I want you to understand what it means to a child who was once left in the snow in his socks. To be seen. To be wanted. To be held not because someone had to, but because someone genuinely, fiercely wanted to. It rewires something in you. Or maybe it repairs something that was broken. I'm not sure which, but my father did that for me. I discovered my love of coffee by accident, the way most good things happen. I was 19, working part-time at a small cafe near my university to pay for my textbooks, and the owner, a tiny, fierce woman in her 60s named Madame Choi, who had absolutely no patience for incompetence and absolutely endless patience for learning. Before we dive into this heartwarming, emotional, slow-burn romance Omegaverse story, note, this is an original work of Milliflex channel. If seen in another channel that is not Milliflex, please report that channel for copyright and impersonation. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Took me under her wing after my 3rd week and started teaching me the craft of it. Not just how to pull an espresso or steam milk, but the philosophy of it. The way a good cup of coffee was an act of care. The way a warm space could be a refuge. People don't come to a cafe for the coffee, Madame Choi told me once, her small hands wrapped around a ceramic mug, steam curling up between us. They come because they are lonely or tired or need somewhere to sit with their thoughts that isn't their own apartment. The coffee is the excuse. The warmth is the reason. Something in me recognized that. Deeply in the place where the cold still lived. I spent the next several years studying, working, saving, and dreaming. I graduated from Hongik University with a degree in business management and a minor in culinary arts. And I did it with my father sitting in the front row of the auditorium, wearing the nicest suit he owned, crying openly and without any apparent embarrassment while I walked across the stage. "Appa, people are looking at you," I whispered when I found him afterward. "Let them look," he said and pulled me into a hug so tight I heard my own spine adjust. I opened my cafe 2 years later. I named it Nunjeep, Snowflake, because I wanted to take the thing that had once represented the worst moments of my childhood and make it into something warm. Something mine. It was a small space tucked between a bookshop and a dry cleaner on a quiet street in Yeonnam-dong, with exposed brick walls and mismatched wooden furniture and soft lighting that made everyone look a little more golden than they actually were. I hung plants from the ceiling. I put out a stack of second-hand books near the window. I made the kind of coffee that tasted like someone genuinely cared whether you were comfortable. My father came in the morning before we opened, helped me arrange the chairs, tested every item on the menu with meticulous seriousness, and declared the honey lavender latte the greatest achievement of the Kim family lineage. Appa, the Kim family lineage includes a long line of factory workers and one accountant. And now a cafe owner. We are ascending. He was my first regular customer, every single morning, sitting at the table near the window, reading his newspaper, nodding approvingly at everyone who came through the door as though he were personally responsible for the quality of the establishment. My staff adored him. My customers knew him by name. He was, in every way that mattered, the heart of that little place, because he was the heart of me. He passed away on a Tuesday in October, 2 years after I opened Nunjeep. Heart failure, they said. Sudden. He had been feeling tired for weeks but hadn't told me, hadn't wanted to worry me when the cafe was doing so well. I found out from his neighbor, who called me because my father had asked her to once, a long time ago, just in case. I closed the cafe for a week. I didn't eat properly for a month. I planted a small persimmon tree in the park near his old apartment with some of his ashes, because he had always loved persimmons, and I sat beside it for a very long time and tried to figure out what it meant to be a person without the person who had made you feel like being a person was worthwhile. I was 25 years old and I had never felt so completely, utterly alone. I want to talk about Park Seo-jin because I think it's important. Not because he deserves a great deal of space in the story of my life, but because understanding him helps explain the particular shape of the loneliness I was carrying by the time I turned 27. I met Seo-jin the year after my father died. He was an alpha, tall, sharp-jawed, the kind of physically imposing presence that made a room rearrange itself around him, and when he first approached me at a mutual friends gathering, he looked at me with such focused, consuming attention that something in my omega biology simply responded, against my better judgment, against everything I should have known. The early days were overwhelming in the way that I think must be a kind of warning, if only we knew how to read it. He was possessive immediately, jealous of my time in a way that he framed as devotion. "I just want you all to myself," he would say, and for a while, God forgive me, it felt like being chosen. Because I had spent so much of my life feeling like I was too much trouble, too delicate, too damaged, that someone wanting me that intensely felt like the opposite of all of that. But insecurity wears many masks, and I had grown up watching it wear my mother's face, and slowly, with a bone-deep weariness, I began to recognize the shape of it again. The accusations that had no basis. The way he made me feel guilty for having friendships that didn't include him. The time he showed up at Nunjeep during the lunch rush, convinced I was flirting with a regular customer, and caused a scene that left my staff pale and shaking. He never hit me. I want to be clear about that because I know people will wonder. He never raised his hand to me. But there are other ways to leave bruises, and he knew most of them. We broke up on a cold evening in February, 8 months after we started dating, standing outside Nunjeep after closing time with the street lights reflecting in the wet pavement. He cried. He begged. He said things that were designed to make me feel responsible for his pain, and for a moment, just a moment, I almost let them work. Then I thought of my father. You are allowed to choose yourself, Yuna, he had told me once when I was 17 and wrestling with something much smaller than this. Choosing yourself is not cruelty. It is simply the most basic form of self-respect. I went back inside and locked the door. After that, I decided I was done. Done with alphas, done with romance, done with the particular vulnerability of wanting someone. I had my cafe. I had my small loyal circle of workers who had become something close to family. I had my volunteer days at the orphanage in Yunpyeonggu, the one I had started visiting after my father died because being around the children made the quietness of my apartment easier to return to afterward. I had a life, and it was a good life, and I told myself firmly and repeatedly that it was enough. I was 27 years old, and I had entirely given up on being loved. The orphanage was called Hatebit House, Sunshine House, and it had been standing for 30 years in a neighborhood that had grown up and modernized around it while it remained stubbornly, beautifully unchanged. Yellow walls, a courtyard with a persimmon tree, children running everywhere with the kind of unlimited energy that makes adults feel simultaneously exhausted and renewed. I went every other Saturday with 3 of my staff members, my barista Hyunji, my part-timer BM Suk, and my manager Jo Era, and we brought coffee for the caretakers and warm drinks and pastries for the older children, and we spent the afternoon playing with the kids and reading to the younger ones and generally making a nuisance of ourselves in the best possible way. I loved those Saturdays. They were the part of my week that felt most like something my father would have approved of. It was on an ordinary Saturday in late April that everything changed. I was in the courtyard, crouched beside a 5-year-old named Minsu who was very seriously explaining to me the rules of a game he had invented that seemed to involve hitting things with a stick and running, when I became aware, with the specific primal alertness that Omegas are apparently cursed with, that a very powerful alpha had entered the space. I felt it before I saw him. It was like a change in atmospheric pressure, the way the air gets right before a thunderstorm. A density. A gravity. I straightened slowly, told Minsu to hold that thought, and turned around. He was standing just inside the gate, speaking quietly to Director Han, one hand in the pocket of his dark coat, the other holding, of all things, a small paper bag that looked like it might contain tangerines. He was tall. Not just tall in the ordinary way, but tall in the way of someone who has never needed to make themselves smaller to move through the world. Dark hair, jaw like something architectural, a face that was so precisely, almost aggressively handsome that my first reaction was something close to irritation. Nobody, I thought, should be allowed to look like that while standing in a children's courtyard holding tangerines. Director Han spotted me and waved me over with a smile. Kim Yuna SSI, come meet someone. This is Dong Lee, he grew up here at Hatebit House. He's come back to visit. He turned at the sound of my name and his eyes found me and I felt it, that specific cellular recognition that every Omega gets taught about in health class and never quite believes will actually happen to them. Like being seen by something that has been looking for you for a very long time. His eyes were dark. Very dark. Patient in a way that contradicted the intensity behind them. Kim Yun, he said. Not a question. Just my name as though it sat comfortably in his mouth. Dong Liase, I said and shook his hand and immediately regretted it because even his handshake had gravity. You come here often? He asked and I heard Hyunji standing 5 feet behind me, muffle a laugh that I would be addressing later. Every other Saturday. We bring drinks and food for the children and the staff. Something moved behind his eyes. That's kind. It's ordinary, I said, because I have always been uncomfortable with compliments. Those are usually the same thing, he said. Minsu, apparently done waiting for me to return to the game, ran directly into the back of my knees and nearly sent me stumbling forward, which would have been catastrophic given how close I was already standing to Dong Lee. I caught myself, turned to scold Minsu very gently, and when I looked back Dong Lee was watching me with an expression I couldn't immediately decode. Something soft in it. Something careful. We talked for 2 hours that afternoon. Mostly about the children, He remembered several of them from when they were born, had clearly kept in contact with Director Han over the years, knew the history of the place in the way of someone who carries a building inside themselves because it was the first place they ever felt safe. I watched him sit on the ground in his expensive coat and let 3 children climb on him simultaneously without any visible concern for his dignity, and I thought, this person is interesting. I had not thought that about anyone in a very long time. When we were leaving, he walked beside me to the gate, and at the last moment as I was pulling on my jacket he said, "I'll be here next Saturday too." I looked at him. "I come every other Saturday." "I know," he said. "Director Han mentioned it." "A beat. That's borderline stalking," I informed him. The corner of his mouth moved. Just slightly. Not quite a smile. "I'm coming to see the children." "Of course you are. And maybe to see you." I walked away without answering. But I was smiling by the time I reached the corner, and I didn't stop for a block and a half. He came back the next Saturday. And the one after that. Within a month, he was a fixture at 8-Bit House on the Saturdays I visited, and within 2 months, he had somehow also become a fixture at Nunjeep on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, sitting at the corner table near the window, my father's table, though I didn't tell him that immediately, with an Americano and whatever book he was currently reading, staying until closing time. I learned things about him slowly, the way you learn about a landscape when you're walking through it rather than observing it from above. He was 32. He ran what he called a private security and consulting firm. I accepted this explanation at face value for considerably longer than I probably should have, but Dong Li had a way of discussing himself that was thorough enough to satisfy surface curiosity and opaque enough to discourage deeper inquiry, and I was frankly too charmed to push. He had been born in China and brought to South Korea as an infant, ended up at 8-Bit House before his first birthday, and had lived there until he was 17. He spoke 5 languages and cooked exactly 2 things well, Japaguri and kanji. He had never been in a relationship that lasted longer than 6 months, which he attributed to his work schedule and which I privately attributed to the fact that he was, despite his extraordinary surface appeal, deeply, foundationally guarded. He was careful with me in a way that was almost reverential. Not weak, God no. Dong Li was not a person capable of weakness in any conventional sense. When he entered a room, the room recognized the fact. When he gave an instruction, it was followed without question. There was something in him that was simply constitutionally dominant, the way certain trees are simply larger than others, not because they forced it but because they grew into it. But with me he was careful. Patient. He asked before he touched me, always. Even the first time he took my hand, we were walking back from the orphanage in early evening light and he simply held his hand out between us, palm up, and waited, and I looked at it for a long moment and then placed mine in it, and we walked the rest of the way without speaking, and it was the most significant thing that had happened to me in years. Our first kiss happened on a rainy evening in July, at the back of Nunjeep after I'd locked up and we were washing the last of the cups together at the kitchen sink, which sounds mundane but was not. We had been talking about his childhood at 8-Bit House, about a specific memory he had of watching snow fall in the courtyard and thinking it looked like something from a movie, and I had turned to say something and found him already looking at me, and the distance between us was so small, and the rain was loud against the windows, and he said, "Can I?" Just that. Barely a whisper. His eyes on mine, serious and dark and asking. I said, "Yes." He kissed me the way people kiss when they mean it. Not frantically. Not the desperate, consuming kind that is more about claiming than connecting. He kissed me slowly, deeply, with both hands cradling my face like I was something worth handling carefully, and the warmth of it went through me from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet and settled in my chest in the exact place where the cold had lived for 20 years. I don't know how long we stood there. Long enough that the rain had changed tempo twice. When he pulled back, he pressed his forehead to mine and stayed there, breathing, and I could feel his heartbeat where my hand had somehow come to rest on his chest, and it was fast, which surprised me because he always seemed so composed, and knowing that I could make his heart race felt like the most extraordinary power I had ever been given. "I've been wanting to do that," he said quietly, "for a very long time." "It's been 4 months, I pointed out. "That," he said, "is a very long time." We started dating officially the following week. Hyunji shrieked loud enough to startle 3 customers and knocked over a display of coffee bags. Byung-suk said, finally, with the weary satisfaction of someone who had been watching something obvious unfold for too long. Jo Era, who had met Dong Li twice and already seemed to trust him implicitly, simply nodded and said, "Good. He looks at you like you're the most important thing in whatever room he's in." I thought about that for a long time afterward. Being someone's most important thing. After years of being the small, inconvenient thing, the one left outside in the snow, the one who cried quietly where no one could hear, being someone's most important thing felt almost too large to hold. But Dong Li was patient with me in that too. There is a particular quality to the love of a dominant alpha who has decided, fully and without reservation, that you are theirs. I say this not romantically but factually, it is an experience unlike anything else. Because Dong Li's love was not passive. It did not wait for me to come to it. It was active and deliberate and present in a way that sometimes took my breath away, not the way Seojin's obsession had been breathtaking in the wrong way, but the way a good and solid thing is breathtaking. The way reliability is, when you have spent a long time without it. He came to Nunjeep on bad days without being asked because somehow he always knew. He would simply appear, slide into his corner seat and stay, not asking questions, not pushing, just being present in that particular way of his that made the air feel less thin. When I told him about my mother, late one night lying on his couch with his arm around me and the city dark outside his window, he listened without interrupting, and when I finished he said nothing for a long time and then pressed his lips to my temple and said very quietly, "She was wrong. Whatever she made you believe about yourself, she was wrong." I cried. Which I almost never did in front of people. He held me until I stopped and didn't say anything else, and somehow that was exactly right. When I told him about my father, he cried a little too. He didn't try to hide it. "He sounds like he was extraordinary," he said. "He was ordinary," I said, echoing Dong Li's own words back at him. "That's usually the same thing." He looked at me for a moment and then he smiled, a real smile, not the almost smile I had grown accustomed to, but the full, unguarded version that he gave rarely and only to me, and said, "I would have liked to know him." "He would have liked you," I said, and I believed it. He always said the most important quality in a person was whether they showed up. "I will always show up," Dong Li said. Not as a promise. As a fact. The way he stated all the things he meant most. A year into dating, he asked me to marry him in the courtyard of Hatebit House, on a Saturday afternoon in April, surrounded by children who had been briefed and were vibrating with the effort of keeping the secret. Min-soo, now 6 and impossible to contain, broke ranks 30 seconds before Dong Li got down on one knee and shouted, "He's going to ask you," at the top of his lungs, which absolutely ruined the surprise and also made it the most perfect proposal I could have imagined. I said yes before Dong Li had fully finished asking. We got married in June, small and simple, just our people. His handful of intensely watchful colleagues whom I had gradually come to understand occupied a rather specific professional category, my cafe staff who cried through the entire ceremony, Director Han from Hatebit House, and a row of children from the orphanage who sat in a very straight line and behaved with extraordinary dignity for approximately 8 minutes before Min-soo started a whisper fight with the girl beside him. Dong Li held my hands at the altar and looked at me the way Jo Era had described, like I was the most important thing in whatever room he was in, and I thought of my father and I thought of the snow and I thought of all the cold and all the years, and I felt, finally, completely, without reservation, warm. We gave ourselves 1 year. Our year. Dong Li had never in his life taken extended time away from his work, and I had never in my life taken extended time away from the cafe, and we had agreed before the wedding that we would carve this year out deliberately, the way you carve out stone to make space for something to grow inside it. We traveled, to Jeju, to Busan, to a small village in the south of France where Dong Li apparently had very complicated professional connections who now operated a vineyard, to Tokyo for 3 weeks where Dong Li ate every variation of ramen available with religious commitment, and I found 3 Japanese cafes whose techniques I studied like scripture. We came home in March of the following year, tanned and rested and more deeply woven into each other than I had known two people could be. I was tired that spring. More tired than travel should account for. I found myself nauseous in the mornings, dizzy in the afternoons, unable to finish my coffee, which for me was genuinely alarming. I put it down to jet lag and readjustment. Then I put it down to seasonal change. Then Hyun-ji, with the specific confidence of someone who had been watching me closely for 4 years, suggested I take a test, and when I argued with her she placed one on the coffee prep counter and said, "Unisai, please." Dong Li was home when I took it. I didn't tell him what I was doing. I went into the bathroom with the door slightly ajar, the way I always did because we had somehow become those people who couldn't fully close each other out even in small ways, and I sat on the edge of the tub and waited. Positive. I held the test for a long time. I was 32 weeks past giving up on things, and here was this small, undeniable fact rearranging the future without asking permission. "Yun?" Dong Li's voice through the door. "You've been quiet for a while." I opened the door. He read the test in my expression before I could hand it to him. I watched his face move through something, surprise, and then something so wide and unguarded it almost didn't look like him, and then he stepped forward and pulled me in, his arms around me, his chin resting on top of my head, and I could feel him breathing, slow and deliberate, the way he breathed when something had moved him too much for ordinary speech. "Yun," he said. Just my name. He had a way of saying it that contained everything. "I know," I said. We went to the doctor the next morning. I want to be honest about this part because it is the part that still lives in me as the most double-edged thing I have ever been given. The doctor confirmed that I was 6 weeks pregnant. And then, in the same appointment, with the careful and compassionate delivery of someone who has had to do this many times and never found it easier, she told us something else. The blood work showed irregularities. She had ordered additional tests. She asked us to come back in 48 hours. 48 hours is a very long time to wait with something like that sitting in the room with you. We barely spoke. Not because there was nothing to say but because there was too much and all of it felt premature. Dong Li moved through those 2 days with a particular quiet intensity, cooking things and cleaning things and sitting close to me always, his hand on my back or my knee or my hand, the constant steady broadcast of I am here, I am here, I am here. The diagnosis was leukemia. Chronic lymphocytic leukemia, early stage in an Omega who was now 6 weeks pregnant. The doctor explained it in careful, measured language. She explained the treatment options and their compatibility with the pregnancy. She explained the statistics, the prognosis, the path forward. She answered all of Dong Li's questions and he asked very many very specific questions in a voice so controlled I could hear the effort it cost him. When she left the room for a moment, Dong Li looked at the floor. "Li," I said. He looked up. His eyes were, it was the first time I had seen him look afraid. Dong Li, who stood in rooms full of dangerous people without blinking, who made decisions in crisis situations with a calm that others found almost inhuman. He looked afraid. "Tell me what you want to do," he said. "Whatever you want, Yun. Whatever you choose, I'm here. We figure this out together. But I need you to tell me what you want." I thought of my father. Of persimmon trees and pale blue bedspreads with clouds on them. Of the courtyard at 8-Bit House. Of Dong Li's hands on my face in a rain-loud kitchen asking can I want to keep the baby, I said. I want the treatment. I want all of it, Li. I want to try. He closed his eyes. Breathe. Then he took both my hands in his and said, "Then we try. That's all. We try again." My father's words. I hadn't told him that. But he said them anyway, as though love recognizes the language of love across any distance. The doctor told me later, some weeks into treatment when we had built enough of a rapport for the more personal conversations, that the illness had almost certainly been building for years. That the specific markers she was seeing were consistent with sustained chronic stress beginning in childhood, with prolonged physiological trauma. The immune system, she explained, keeps records that the mind sometimes doesn't. So my mother's hands were in this too. Her cold and her silences and her locked doors. Still finding their way into my body 20-something years later, still leaving evidence. I thought about this for one afternoon, sitting by the cafe window with treatment making my hands tired and the persimmon tea Dong Li had made me cooling in its cup. I thought about it and I felt something move through me, not the old ache, not the ember in my chest, but something different, softer. A kind of letting go that wasn't forgiveness exactly, but was the acknowledgement that she had been sick in her own way, and that her sickness had wounded me, and that I had been wounded, and that I had survived it, and that the survival had brought me here, to this cafe, to this marriage, to this child already growing inside me. I was not grateful for the suffering. I want to be clear about that. But I was, improbably, against all rational expectation, grateful for where I had arrived. Pregnancy, it turns out, is an experience that does not particularly concern itself with your other circumstances. The nausea did not consult the chemotherapy schedule. The cravings were not interested in whether I had the energy to act on them. The baby, our daughter, as we eventually learned, grew with the absolute indifference to difficulty that all new life demonstrates, the perfect and breathtaking confidence of something that simply insists on existing. Dong Li took 6 months away from whatever his work technically was and ran the cafe in my place on the days I was too tired to be upright, which in the second trimester was more days than not. He was, to everyone's surprise including his own, remarkably good at it. Hyunji said he had a natural authority that made even difficult customers behave themselves. Joe Era said he memorized the menu in 2 days and could pull an espresso that was, and I quote, technically correct but terrifyingly precise. "You're not supposed to be good at this," I told him one evening when he brought me the honey lavender latte, my father's favorite, now his, in bed with the exact temperature and ratio that I preferred. "I'm good at paying attention," he said simply, sitting beside me. "To me? To you?" I kissed him. He tasted like coffee and like himself, which had become the same thing to me, and he kissed me back slowly, unhurriedly, the way we kissed now, with time in it, with all the weight of everything we'd been through and everything still ahead of us held gently between us. "I'm scared," I admitted against his mouth, and he pulled back just enough to see my face. "I know. Not of dying. I mean, I don't want that. But not of it the way you'd think. I'm scared of leaving her without," my voice broke. "Yun, Without knowing. Without her knowing what she meant to me. What? Yun? He held my face in both hands. Listen to me. She will know. I will make sure of it. Every single day of her life she will know exactly what her apple was. She will know your voice and your laugh and that you named this cafe after the snow because you decided to take the hardest thing and make it warm. She will know all of it. I swear this to you. I believed him. There was never a moment in our time together when I didn't believe him, but I believed him most completely in that moment. Our daughter was born in December in the early afternoon, when the light outside the hospital window was doing that particular winter thing where it turns the whole world gold even though it's cold. She weighed 3.1 kilograms. She had dark hair and Dong Li's jaw already. She'll be impossible when she grows up, Hyunji said when she came to visit and was absolutely right, and my eyes, or so everyone said. Dong Li held her for a long time before he handed her to me, standing by the window in that golden light, and I watched his face. This man who had faced things I would never fully know, who had built himself out of the wreckage of abandonment and fought his way into a life on his own terms, I watched his face completely unmake itself. Every guard down. Every wall gone. Just a man holding his daughter in a room full of winter light. Hello, he said to her quietly. I'm your Appa. The other one. You already know the important one. I laughed. It turned into crying. He sat beside me and we held her together, all three of us in the small circle of each other, and I thought, this is the thing I was being kept for. All of it, the snow and the cold and the years and the losses, it was all carrying me toward this. We named her Yuna. The 3 years that followed were the best of my life. I don't say that with grief, though grief is present in the saying. I say it as fact because it is true, and because I think truth is the only worthy gift I can leave. Yuna was extraordinary. Is extraordinary. From her very first year she had a particular quality of attention. She watched the world with a focused, luminous curiosity that had Dong Li's precision and, they all told me, my warmth. She loved the cafe the way I had. Always hoped a child of mine would love it, not as a workplace but as a place of belonging, a place where the smell of coffee meant safety and the sound of the grinder meant home. She would sit on the prep counter when she was old enough to be trusted not to fall off it and watch me work with an expression of grave professional interest. More foam, Appa, she would instruct at age 2, pointing at the milk steamer. You don't even drink coffee, Yunia? I know how it should look. Dong Li spoiled her rotten and simultaneously raised her with the most exquisite consistency. He was firm about the things that mattered. Kindness, honesty, the acknowledgement of feelings, the importance of apology. He was gentle about the rest. She was allowed to make messes and ask questions and disagree with him, provided she did so respectfully, and she availed herself of all three privileges constantly. He told her about me even then, even when she was small enough that the words were seeds planted ahead of their season. He told her I made the best coffee in Seoul. He took her to Hatebit House on Saturdays. He planted a small container garden on their apartment balcony with lavender and chamomile because I had grown those things in the cafe, and he taught her to tend it. I was there for all of it. I was present, fully, gratefully, painfully present, for every month of those 3 years, through the treatment and the remission and the slow, inexorable progression that the doctors had warned us about and that we had somehow still not fully prepared for. I was not afraid by the end. I want to say that clearly. I was not afraid. I was sad, deeply, genuinely sad, in the way of someone who has found the exact place in the world where they belong and is being asked to leave it earlier than seems fair. But fear had been a childhood companion of mine, and I had largely released it in the years I had spent being loved well, and what remained in its place was something much closer to gratitude. The last morning, Dong Li lay beside me and held my hand, and Yuna was asleep in the chair by the window where she had insisted on staying the night, her small face peaceful and unaware, and the winter light was coming through the curtains and making everything gold again. Li, I said. I'm here. You know I've been warm, I said. Since you. I've been warm. He pressed my hand to his lips and held it there, and I felt the shudder move through him. The controlled, private grief of a man who will hold himself together for his daughter in the years ahead and is allowing himself this one unguarded moment while there is still someone to hold him back. You warmed me too, he said. Whatever I was before you, you should know that. I know. Yun. I know, Li. I know. I closed my eyes in the gold light with his hand around mine, and the smell of coffee was in the air from the machine on the bedside table that he ran every morning for me, the honey lavender lot always, and the last thing I heard was my daughter breathing in the chair by the window, steady and even and alive, carrying both of us forward into a world I would not see but could, in that moment, almost clearly imagine. I think the dead stay. Not in the ways the living fear, not in cold spots or shadows or the particular creak of a floorboard in an empty room. We stay in the ordinary places. In the muscle memory of a recipe. In the angle of light through a cafe window in the late afternoon. In the way a child tilts her head when she is thinking hard, exactly the way her other father used to do. Yuna is 5 now. She has grown into her name the way a person grows into the thing they were always going to be, fully, confidently, with no apparent doubt about the rightness of herself in the world. She has Dong Li's precision and my stubbornness and some third quality entirely her own that I can't account for and love completely. Dong Li kept his promise. Every one of them. He did not remarry. Not because he couldn't. There have been people, I think, who looked at him and saw what there was to love, because it was always visible to anyone paying attention, but because he chose, very deliberately, a different kind of life. A life built around the cafe which he kept running in my name, with Hyunji and Byung-suk and Jo Era who stayed on and became something close to family. A life built around Hatebit House on Saturdays, where he and Yuna went together and where she now ran in the courtyard under the persimmon tree the same way he once watched snow fall in it. A life built around the small container garden on the balcony with the lavender and chamomile, which Yuna tended with absolute seriousness and which bloomed every spring. He told her about me. He kept that promise most faithfully of all. I know this not in any mysterious way, only in the way that love knows itself, recognizes its own work, sees what it built and understands that the building is continuing. She knows about the snow and the cafe and the honey lavender latte. She knows about her Halmoni who was sick in her heart and her Harabiaji who raised her Appa and loved him without reservation. She knows about Hatebit House and how her Appa used to bring coffee to the children and how that was where her fathers met. She knows these things the way children know the things that matter, not as history but as the living ground beneath her feet. I left her the cafe. I left them both the cafe. Not as a business but as a place. The way Madame Choi once told me, people come not for the coffee but for the warmth. And the warmth is still there. I made sure of it. I poured it into the walls and the mismatched chairs and the honey lavender recipe that Dong Li makes now almost as well as I did, and on the days when Yuna sits on the prep counter and supervises the foam I think she feels it. I think she feels me. And I know, that is enough. More than enough. It is, in fact, everything. The cold is very far away now. I am warm.